Mohammed is often described as the one great religious founder whose life takes place in the full light of history, the 620s AD. Unlike Abraham, Moses, or even Jesus, he seems to step out of the historical record with unusual clarity. But almost everything we think we know about Mohammed was written down long after he died, and shaped by people who already knew how the story ended. Look at this comparison. Abraham and Moses have gaps of centuries, even millennia, between their traditional dates and the earliest sources about them. Jesus has a gap of decades. Mohammed's gap is smaller, roughly 50 to 100 years. But smaller gap does not mean clearer picture. The events that fill that gap changed everything. So, if the full light of history is dimmer than we thought, where does the light come from? Three main sources. First, the Koran, Muhammad's words as composed by divine inspiration, closest to his lifetime, but scholars debate when it was assembled into its final form. Second, the Hadith, oral traditions compiled within about 50 years of his death. Hadith means reports or accounts attributed to Muhammad. Third, the Sira, formal biographies written more than 100 years after Muhammad died. Each source sits at a different distance from the events. The critical concept here is retrospective shaping, the process by which later knowledge and beliefs influence how earlier events get recorded. The problem with these sources is not that they are fabricated, they contain genuine historical memory, but writers presented events in light of what they already knew happened and what they believed should have happened. Not fabrication, right? Retrospective shaping. And that distinction matters throughout this video. With those source limitations in mind, what can we piece together? Muhammad was born around 570 to 580 into a reasonably prominent but not affluent Meccan family, the Quraysh, the dominant clan of Mecca. He may have been a merchant. The Quran contains mercantile similes, scales, weighing, profit and loss, bargaining. This language suggests a merchant's worldview, but it's circumstantial, not firm evidence. It illustrates how historians work with indirect clues, suggestive, never conclusive. He married Khadija from a wealthier, higher status family. Around age 40, he began preaching. His message was monotheism directed against Arabian polytheism. But Arabia already had substantial Jewish and Christian populations. Muhammad knew something of both traditions. His preaching was essentially biblical monotheism for the Arabs, proclaiming the unity of God through a chain of prophets. Abraham to Moses to Isaiah to Jesus to Muhammad. Now let's see retrospective shaping in action with one of the most famous events in Islamic history, the Hegira. That's Muhammad's migration from Mecca to Medina in 622. This event is so foundational that the Islamic calendar starts from this date. The traditional account is dramatic. The Meccans plotted to assassinate Muhammad. He narrowly escaped with divine assistance and fled to Medina. But there is no independent evidence of this degree of hostility. The historically minimal account looks different. The Meccans simply didn't listen. Muhammad received an invitation from Medina and relocated. The Hegira really happened. Muhammad really moved. But the framing, the assassination plot, the narrow escape, may reflect the event's later significance more than what occurred at the time. This isn't about calling the tradition wrong, it's about understanding how and why stories get shaped. When an event becomes the starting point of an entire calendar, the pressure to give it a dramatic origin is enormous. Every culture does this. The founding of Rome, the Exodus, the American Revolution. Origin stories grow more dramatic as their consequences grow more significant. The Hegira follows the same pattern. The Hegira shows us how events get reshaped, but there's another layer. The people around Muhammad also get reshaped by later history. His first converts were not random strangers. They were his inner circle, Khadija, his wife, Ali, his cousin, who later married his daughter Fatima, Abu Bakr, a powerful merchant from a leading Meccan clan, Usman, a member of the Umayyad family, and Omar. These names matter enormously because Abu Bakr, Omar, Usman, and Ali all became caliphs, leaders of the Islamic community after Muhammad's death. The civil war of the 650s was fought over which of these lineages had the rightful claim to leadership. This is precisely why the Hadith sources compiled during and after that civil war must be read with caution. Each faction had an incentive to emphasize their founder's closeness to Muhammad. So where does all this leave us? What do we know? Muhammad existed. He lived in Mecca. He preached monotheism rooted in Jewish and Christian traditions. He moved to Medina in 622. He attracted followers from prominent families. Beyond that, we're working with sources shaped, not fabricated, but shaped by civil war, imperial expansion, and the theological development. The full light of history turns out to be more like light passing through stained glass, real, but colored by the medium it travels through. Here's a framework you can apply to any ancient biography, not just Muhammad's. 3 questions. 1. When was this written relative to the events? The gap matters. 2. What happened between the events and the writing? Political upheaval reshapes memory. 3. What did the writer already know about how the story ended? Retrospective shaping is inevitable when you already know the outcome. Then these questions work for Caesar, for the Buddha, for Confucius, for any figure whose biography was composed after the fact, and that's nearly every figure in the ancient world. Muhammad lived in the full light of history, but that light has been refracted through a century of memory, politics, and faith. The historian's job isn't to extinguish that light, but to understand how it bends,